Deep in the heart of the silver pine forest, where the trees whispered secrets only the wind could understand, lived a small brown bear named Eli. He was not particularly big or brave, but he had a heart so full of wonder that it almost hummed inside his chest. Every night, when the rest of the forest snuggled into cozy dens and nests, Eli would lie awake in his cave. He wasn't afraid of the dark, not exactly. But he didn't like it either. It felt too quiet, too big, too empty. The moonlight would shine faintly through the cave entrance, painting soft patterns on the stone walls. But it wasn't enough. Eli wanted more than shadows and silence. He wanted something warm, something comforting, something that felt like a hug you could see. "I wish I had a nightlight," he mumbled one evening, curled under his patchwork leaf blanket. His mother, a large and gentle bear named Mara, stroked his back with one paw. "The stars are your nightlights," she said softly. "They're far away, but they shine just for you." Eli blinked up at the little patches of sky visible through the treetops. Tiny white dots blinked back. But it wasn't the same. They were too high, too distant, too unreachable. "What if," Eli whispered one night, his eyes wide and glimmering, "what if I could bring one down? Just one. For me." The next morning, the glow from the little star had dimmed, but it was still warm in Eli's paws. He cradled it as the sun spilled into the cave. "Did you really fall from the sky?" he whispered. The star blinked once, dim, then bright, like a slow nod. Eli carried it outside. The forest was just waking up. Dew clung to spiderwebs like glass beads, and birds were beginning to sing. But Eli wasn't listening. He tilted his head to the sky, trying to figure something out. "How do I find more of you?" he asked. The wind picked up then, rustling the leaves like a whisper. Eli turned toward it, ears twitching. And then he heard it. A voice. Not loud, not clear, but real. "Only hearts that wonder can see us. Only hands that hope can hold us." Eli's eyes widened. "Was that you?" he asked the star. But it wasn't the star. It was the wind itself, soft and ancient. "Seek the forest's oldest eyes," it whispered. "There, you'll find the path to the stars." Eli didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like a clue. And if there was one thing he knew about clues, it was that they led to adventures. He looked down at the glowing star. It still pulsed gently in his paws. "I think we're going to need a bag," he said with a grin. Eli packed carefully, a satchel made of woven bark, filled with soft moss, just right for holding stars. He also brought a few berries and honeycombs wrapped in leaves, because even adventurers need snacks. As he stepped past the edge of his familiar path, something changed. The forest looked different. Not scary, just quieter, like it was holding its breath. The trees were taller here, their branches like arms reaching for the sky. The sunlight fell in golden patches on the ground, and little specks of dust floated like tiny stars in the air. Eli felt it in his fur. This was a place of magic. It was then he heard it again, the wind's whisper. "The oldest eyes." He paused by a gnarled tree, its bark curled and knotted like wrinkles. Its trunk was wide, its roots deep. Eli touched it gently. "Are you one of the oldest?" he asked. The tree didn't answer, but a single pine cone fell from above, landing at his feet with a soft thud. "Is that a yes?" Eli grinned. He looked up, and that's when he saw them. Two glowing shapes, like stars, tucked between the branches high above. But they weren't stars exactly. They were reflections, or maybe memories of stars. He felt the whisper again. "Find the owl who never blinks." And suddenly Eli understood. The forest became darker as he walked, but the little star in his bag gave off enough glow to guide him. Shadows danced between trees, and every so often, a rustle reminded him he wasn't alone. Eventually, he reached a clearing where a large tree stood, the biggest tree he had ever seen. Its trunk was so wide, it would take 4 bears to wrap their arms around it. High on one of its thickest branches sat a snowy white owl. She didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Eli stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "Are you the owl who never blinks?" The owl didn't respond. "I'm trying to find more stars. Real ones. Like this." He opened his satchel and showed her the glowing star. The owl tilted her head slightly. Then, without a sound, she dropped something from her claw, a parchment scroll tied with silver string. Eli caught it. A map. The owl finally blinked once. Slowly, like a blessing, Eli unrolled the scroll. It wasn't like any map he'd seen before. It didn't have roads or towns. It had constellations, trails made of light, arrows that curved like wind, mountains marked with symbols that glowed faintly. At the bottom, written in a delicate hand, was a message. To collect what falls, you must go where nothing rises. Begin at the Lake of Reflections. Eli followed the map through thickets of silver-tipped ferns and past sleepy hollows where fireflies hovered like lanterns. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became, until even his paws padding on moss seemed loud. Eventually, the trees parted, and there it was. A lake so still it looked like a mirror. Not a ripple, not a wave, only a perfect reflection of the sky above. The stars twinkled both above and below, as though Eli stood between two heavens. He stepped closer, heart racing. The parchment had called it the Lake of Reflections, and now he understood why. It didn't just reflect the stars. It reflected you. Eli peered into the water and gasped. He saw himself, but not just his face. He saw his thoughts, his wonder, his hopes. They shimmered like stars within the reflection of his chest. And then something incredible happened. One of the stars in the lake began to glow brighter than the others. Slowly, carefully, it rose from the water like a bubble. Eli held out his paws. The star floated toward him and landed gently. Luminous. Alive. He held it close, his heart thumping. This one was different. Not just light. It felt like truth. Like a secret only the lake and he had shared. The whispering wind rustled behind him. Stars do not fall to be kept, little bear. They rise when they are seen. Eli looked down at the glowing light. He hadn't chased this one. He had seen it. As Eli left the lake, the sky began to darken. Not with night, but with clouds. The wind changed. It no longer whispered secrets, but warnings. A storm was coming. Thunder cracked above, and lightning split the sky. Rain poured down, cold and sharp, soaking his fur. He tucked the stars deep into his satchel, wrapping them in moss to keep them warm and safe. He ran, through thorns and mud, past tangled roots and slick stones, until his legs burned and his breath came in sharp gasps. Then he saw it, a hollow under a rock ledge. He scrambled inside just as the sky roared above. He huddled in the dry corner, soaked and shivering. And for the first time, he was afraid. Not of the dark, not of the thunder, but of failing. What if I can't find more? He whispered, hugging the satchel close. What if the stars stop listening? He closed his eyes. Then, a faint glow pushed through the storm dark. His stars, still shining. They hadn't gone out. He smiled through chattering teeth. Maybe he didn't need to chase the sky. Maybe he just had to keep his heart open. The wind returned, gentle again, curling around his shelter like a blanket. Even stars hide in storms. Eli fell asleep to the sound of rain and the soft hum of starlight. When Eli awoke, the storm had passed. The forest glistened with rain. Droplets clung to every leaf like diamonds, and the air smelled like wet bark and clean beginnings. He set off once more, the map crinkling in his paw. The next path wasn't marked clearly, but he had a direction in his heart. And that's when he met her. A small red fox, sitting on a log, licking water from her fur. "You look like a bear with questions," she said, her eyes sharp and kind. Eli blinked. "I think them." "I know," she said. "I've seen you walking through the night. And I've seen what you carry." He hesitated. "The stars." She nodded. "I know their song." Eli tilted his head. "They sing. Not like birds, but in other ways. When the sky listens, the stars speak. When your heart listens, you hear them." Eli sat beside her. "Can you help me find more?" The fox's tail curled neatly around her paws. "Only if you're ready to hear what they really are." "I think I am," he said softly. She stood and trotted a few steps forward. "Then follow me." "I'll take you to the mountain of stillness." He scrambled up. "Is that where more stars are?" The fox didn't look back. "That's where the sky touches the earth, and where truths come quietly." Eli followed her, paws steady and heart glowing. Eli followed the fox through the waking forest, the trees thinning slowly as they moved toward the horizon, where a vast, silver-gray silhouette rose against the sky like a sleeping giant. The mountain of stillness didn't roar or crack or boast like the stories said mountains should. It simply existed, ancient and calm, with snow at its peak and mist wrapped like a scarf around its middle. As they approached, the sounds of the forest fell away. The buzzing of insects softened, the wind stilled, even the chatter of birds paused as though nature itself were holding its breath. The fox didn't speak, and Eli didn't ask questions. He felt them all coiling in his chest like roots seeking soil, but something about the mountain told him this was not a place for noise. Step after step, the ground changed beneath his paws. Moss gave way to stone, soft became solid, and the air grew thinner, crisper, as though each breath had to be earned. Around them, the sky began to open wide, revealing endless stars overhead even though it was still early evening, and Eli felt the odd sensation that he was walking not toward the sky, but into it. Higher and higher they climbed, the silence deepening until it became a presence all its own, and it was then that Eli noticed something remarkable. The stars he carried in his satchel weren't just glowing, they were pulsing in rhythm, gently, like a heartbeat shared with the sky. He paused on a ledge, gazing down at the vast forest far below, and for the first time, he felt what the mountain must have felt for thousands of years: patience, presence, peace. The fox finally turned to him, her eyes reflecting the entire night sky. "You've come far," she said softly, the wind carrying her words like threads of moonlight. Eli nodded, unable to speak, his throat thick with something he couldn't name. "But to hold the sky," she continued, "you must be willing to let it go." The words confused him. He looked down at his satchel, the glowing stars like tiny, living dreams he had protected so carefully, and he didn't understand. Wasn't that the point? To collect them? To have a light in the dark? But even as he thought it, the mountain seemed to answer, not in words but in stillness, in weight, in the hush that followed every heartbeat, and in that quiet, Eli understood something he hadn't before. The stars weren't meant to be kept. They were meant to be seen, felt, remembered. His paws trembled as he reached into his satchel and pulled out the first star he had ever found. The one that had come down just for him, nestled between mushrooms on that first brave night. And as he held it high, it glowed so brightly it lit up the entire ledge in golden warmth. Slowly he lifted it to the sky. And it rose. Gently, gracefully, as though it had only been waiting for permission. One by one, he held the others aloft, each one pulsing with quiet joy as they floated upward, joining the stars above with a soft chime like wind through glass. When the last one left his paw, Eli sat down on the cold stone, empty-handed but not empty-hearted, and he felt something fill the space where the stars had been, not light, but peace. The fox sat beside him, and for a while, they said nothing. The wind returned, quiet and sure, brushing his fur like an old friend. The mountain didn't ask for thanks. The stars didn't need to be his. And for the first time in his life, Eli felt completely, deeply okay with the dark. Because it wasn't empty, it was full. Eli remained still long after the stars had risen, his paws curled over his knees, his breath slow, and even as the wind played gently through the fur on his face, and for the first time he could remember, he didn't want to move, not from cold, not from fear, not even from curiosity, but from a feeling so rare it made his chest ache: contentment. The fox beside him closed her eyes, her tail wrapped neatly over her paws, and together they sat on the high ledge of the mountain of stillness, beneath a sky that no longer looked distant, no longer unreachable, but close, familiar, even. And as Eli gazed upward at the tapestry of stars, he noticed something else. A new shape was forming among them, a slow shimmering rearrangement, as if the sky itself were telling a story, not in words or sound but in constellations. The stars flickered and shifted gently, like dancers in slow motion, and there in the center of them he saw a shape he recognized. A small bear, standing tall with a glowing heart, and tears welled up in his eyes, Not from sadness but from awe, from the impossible bigness of the moment. The fox opened one eye and followed his gaze, and when she saw the constellation, she smiled, not a sly fox smile, but one soft with pride and understanding. "The sky remembers," she whispered, her voice barely more than the rustle of dry leaves. "Every heart that gives instead of keeps, every soul that shines without asking to be seen." Eli swallowed hard, a lump caught in his throat, and as he blinked away the tears, the stars in the sky blinked with him, not as distant lights but as companions, old friends. Then, without warning, a beam of light descended from the highest point in the sky, not harsh like lightning but soft and golden, like sunlight remembered in dreams, and it wrapped around him, not his body, but something deeper, the part of him that had whispered, "I'm afraid of the dark," so long ago. The beam pulsed once, twice, and then he heard it. Not the wind, not the fox, but something vast and ancient and kind. The sky itself. Not a voice, not exactly, but a feeling that shaped itself into knowing, and that knowing settled deep into Eli's chest like a second heartbeat. Stars are not things to take. They are moments, memories, reflections of what we become when we believe in something brighter than ourselves. Eli's breath caught, and he saw in his mind all the moments that had led him here. The first night in the cave, the hush of the lake, the storm that tested his hope, the fox's knowing eyes, and now this, the truth of what stars really were. Not prizes, not trophies, but reflections of the best parts of us. He closed his eyes, and the light around him brightened, warm and familiar, like the first fire ever lit on a winter night. He saw himself, younger, curled against his mother's side in their cave, whispering his wish for a nightlight. He saw himself chasing falling stars, frightened but brave. He saw the owl with her map, the lake's reflection, the mountain's hush. And then he saw himself now, not searching, not collecting, but understanding. The light faded slowly, sinking back into the heavens, and Eli opened his eyes to find the fox still watching him, not with answers, but with approval. "Now you know," she said gently. He nodded. "They aren't meant to be mine." "No," she agreed, "but they are part of you. Always." And with that, she rose, gave a small bow, and disappeared into the mist, her form vanishing like moonlight into morning fog. Eli stood alone on the ledge, yet he didn't feel alone. Above him, the stars shimmered brighter, and he truly knew, that no matter where he went from here, no matter how dark the night or deep the forest, he would never be without light. Because the sky had told him its secret, and now it lived in him, not as a glow to hold, but as a truth to share. Eli began his descent from the mountain of stillness under the soft hush of moonlight, feeling changed in ways he couldn't put into words. His paws moved the same way, his breath came as it always had, yet the world looked different, not because it had changed, but because he had. Each step down the path felt lighter, as though the mountain had taken a weight from his shoulders he hadn't known he was carrying, and though the sky stretched wide above him with its blanket of glittering stars, something stirred in the air, something subtle, a shift too gentle for most creatures to notice, but Eli felt it in his chest the way trees feel the seasons before leaves begin to turn. When he reached the forest floor again, a soft mist was already creeping between the trunks, curling low and cool like forgotten breath, and the animals of the forest emerged from their dens and burrows to greet him, not with words, but with eyes full of questions. A family of rabbits blinked up at him. A squirrel clutched an acorn but did not nibble. A deer stood just inside the trees, still and listening. They had all heard stories of the bear who collected stars, but now that he had returned from the mountain, they could see something in his walk, in the quiet smile on his face, something that made them hope. Eli nodded to each of them, warm and gentle, but even as he spoke to a few curious chipmunks and gave a moss-wrapped berry to a sleepy badger, he noticed it. The stars above had begun to dim. Not all at once, not like someone blowing out candles, but gradually, like music fading in a room full of people too busy to hear. At first he thought it was a trick of the mist or his tired eyes from the long climb, but when he looked again, he saw it clearly. Patches of sky that once shimmered with stars were now soft and gray, and others were beginning to lose their light, flickering faintly like lanterns out of oil. Confused, he looked down at his satchel, but it was empty. The stars he had released had risen, not fallen. He climbed a tree, hoping for a clearer view, and from the top he gasped, not just the stars above, but their reflections in the lakes, the tiny glints in the eyes of nocturnal creatures, the sparkles on spiderwebs, all of it, all the night's quiet light, was fading. Panic rose in him like a fast river. Had he done something wrong? Had releasing the stars caused this? He leapt down, hurrying through the forest with frantic steps, calling for the fox, for the owl, for anyone who might explain what was happening, but only silence answered. The wind didn't whisper. The trees didn't sway. Even the leaves underfoot seemed to hesitate. And then, in the deepest part of the forest, he saw something strange, a clearing filled with creatures, not just bears and foxes, but owls, badgers, raccoons, porcupines, lynxes, all gathered under the emptying sky, all looking up with quiet fear. In the center of the clearing stood a great stone, cracked down the middle, and carved into it were symbols Eli didn't understand, but above the stone, where the brightest star should have been, the sky was now completely black. "What's happening?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling. A voice answered, not the fox, not the owl, not the wind, but a slow, creaking sound like old wood bending. It came from a great tortoise, older than any creature Eli had ever seen, his shell covered in moss and tiny glowing mushrooms. "The sky is dimming," the tortoise said, "because the stars are being forgotten." Eli blinked. "Forgotten? Stars," the tortoise continued, "are born in wonder and burn with belief. When they are held too long, or chased for too long, or kept only for comfort, they fade. They must be remembered. Not owned, not stored, just remembered." Eli sat down hard, heart thudding. "But I didn't. I gave them back. I thought I understood." "You do," the tortoise said gently, "but many do not. Word spread of the bear who collected stars, and others have tried to do the same. They saw light and thought. They saw falling stars and tried to cage them. They forgot to listen to the sky." Eli's chest ached. He hadn't meant to start anything. He had only wanted a light in the dark. "What do I do now?" he asked. "You remind them," the tortoise said. "Not by collecting stars, but by telling their story." And with that, Eli knew. It wasn't enough to know the truth. He had to share it, not just with friends, with everyone. Because the sky was not just a ceiling above the world. It was a mirror for the heart. And without hearts that remembered how to wonder, the stars would keep fading. One by one, Eli stood at the edge of the great clearing, heart heavy and eyes wide as the stars continued their slow retreat into the shadows above. And though the sky had not gone completely dark, it now resembled something more like a memory than a presence. A soft echo of what had once been bright and endless, now growing dimmer with each breath of silence. Around him, the animals of the forest huddled closer together, watching not just the sky, but Eli himself, their eyes full of unspoken hope, as if something in their bones told them he had a part to play in all this, that perhaps the little bear who once gathered stars could help the world remember them again. The tortoise, ancient and unmoving, simply blinked once and returned to his quiet, allowing the moment to stretch and settle, giving Eli space to think. And he did. He thought of everything he had learned, about wonder, about stories, about the fragile weight of light and memory, and he realized then that his journey had never been about possession or proof, but about perspective. He had never needed to have the stars to be changed by them. He had only needed to see them, to carry them inside, and to share that warmth with others. But how do you give away something you can't hold? How do you let go of something that isn't yours but still feels like part of your soul? These questions sat in him like stones, heavy but not cruel, and as the air grew colder with the absence of light, a quiet determination began to rise in their place, steady and clear. Eli climbed back onto the stone in the center of the clearing, his little paws gripping its weathered surface, and he looked out across the crowd of faces, some timid, some tired, all watching. "The stars," he said softly, "don't belong to anyone. Not even to the sky. They belong to our memories, our hearts, our hopes." The forest didn't breathe. Even the leaves stopped moving. I tried to keep one once. I wanted it to make me feel safe. But I learned that real light comes when you share it. when you tell the truth of what you've seen, when you let go so someone else can hold on. As he spoke, something shimmered faintly above, one single star, barely visible, flickering like a candle, but it was enough to draw every gaze upward. Eli saw it too, and felt a rush of warmth in his chest. He reached slowly into his satchel, not for a star, but for the memory of one. He pictured the first one he'd ever held, the way it had pulsed softly in his paws like a living wish, and then he spoke again, not to the animals, but to the sky. "I remember you," he whispered. "I remember your light." Another star blinked into view. Then a third. A fourth. Around the clearing, creatures began to whisper their own memories, of nights watching stars with their young, of guiding themselves home by moonlight, of dreams carried quietly on the backs of fireflies. And with each word spoken, with each story shared, more stars returned, blooming gently into the dark like seeds remembering how to grow. A raccoon told of seeing his mother's reflection in the stars. A young fawn spoke of wishing on them the night her legs first held her upright. Even the tortoise, in his slow, steady voice, shared how the stars once told him when the seasons were changing and when it was time to sleep. Eli felt his eyes brim with tears, not of sadness, but of awe. He hadn't needed to find the stars again. He only needed to help others remember that they were never gone. Above them, the sky deepened into a tapestry of light once more, not quite as full as before, but glowing now with a new kind of strength, born not from distance but from closeness. From memory. From letting go. The wind returned, soft and playful, ruffling Eli's fur as if to say well done, and the forest seemed to sigh in relief, not because the darkness was over, but because now everyone knew how to carry light through it. Eli climbed down from the stone, his paws steady, his heart no longer filled with longing but with something deeper, trust. Trust that even in the darkest places, even on the quietest nights, there would always be someone, somewhere, who remembered, who looked up. And in that act of remembering, the stars would never fade. Not truly, because the greatest gift he had found, the real gift, wasn't the light he had once held. It was the light he had helped others see. The night stretched on in peaceful quiet, the stars hanging gently above like soft whispers of memory, their glow steady and warm, woven into the fabric of the sky as though the entire universe had exhaled a long, relieved sigh. The clearing hummed with a kind of serenity that only comes when something long sought has finally been understood. Eli, standing at the heart of it all, felt the pull of something deep inside him, something ancient and timeless, the call of home. The wind swirled around him, the soft rustle of leaves now carrying a different kind of message. The journey had been long, filled with questions and discoveries, filled with doubts and triumphs. Yet now, as he stood among the creatures of the forest, his heart was full, not of the stars he had once chased, but of the stories they had shared, of the connections he had found, and of the peace that comes when you let go of what you thought you needed and trust what you already have. He knew it was time to go. The animals, sensing the shift in the air, turned their eyes toward him, each one quiet but understanding, their own hearts full of the same realization. They had gathered the light in their hearts, each star a thread of their own stories, and now it was Eli's turn to return, to take what he had learned and bring it back to the place where his journey had begun. The tortoise nodded slowly from the center of the clearing, his wise eyes meeting Eli's, and with a gentle rumble of a voice, he spoke. "The path home is never as far as it seems. You carry the sky with you, little bear. You carry the stars." Eli smiled softly, his chest swelling with a warmth he had never known. He had spent so long searching for something beyond himself, something to hold on to, but now he understood. The stars had never left him. They were woven into his very soul, and each lesson, each step, had brought him closer to the understanding that light didn't need to be owned. It needed to be shared. The forest path that led him back home seemed to rise up to meet him as he began his journey. The trees whispered softly as he passed. The same trees that had once felt foreign to him now felt like old friends. The air was cooler now, the last traces of the evening mist dissolving as the first hint of dawn kissed the edges of the sky. Eli walked steadily, his paws light on the earth, and as the forest opened to the familiar fields where his home lay, he felt the weight of his journey in every step, but not in a burdensome way. It was the weight of growth, of discovery, of a heart learning to live with its newfound wisdom. When he finally reached the little cave he called home, the familiar scent of moss and earth wrapped around him like a soft blanket. He stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The place where he had first dreamed of stars, the small patch of sky visible from his doorway, the stones that lined the path to his home. He felt so much older now, yet still so young, and as he stepped inside, he found the quiet comfort of his own space waiting for him. But this time, it wasn't just a place to rest. It was a place to remember. Eli sat at the mouth of the cave, the rising sun spilling golden light across the fields, and he gazed up at the sky. Though it was morning, the stars still lingered in his heart, faint but ever-present, like a melody that would play softly in his mind for as long as he lived. His heart, once so full of longing for something more, now felt full in a way he never imagined. He had found what he needed all along, not in the stars themselves, but in the act of sharing them, in the way the light of one heart could reach out and touch another. His thoughts turned to the animals he had left behind, to the forest that had watched him grow, to the creatures whose stories were now woven into the fabric of his own life. They had shared the stars, and in doing so, they had shared their hearts. He was no longer the bear who collected stars. He was the bear who helped others see them. And for that, he was forever grateful. With the warmth of the morning sun on his fur and the quiet promise of the stars above, Eli settled into his cave, his heart light, his spirit whole. The stars might dim in the distance, but here, in his little home, they would never fade. Not as long as he carried them in his chest, not as long as he remembered that light, true light, was something that needed to be shared, not held. The days that followed Eli's return to his cave were filled with a quiet joy, a peace he had never known before, as though the very rhythm of life had slowed down to match the steady pulse of his heart. Each morning, he would wake to the soft light of dawn spilling through the entrance, and each evening he would watch the stars emerge in the deepening sky. They weren't as bright as they once were, but that was all right. They didn't need to be. The sky, like the forest, like the hearts of all the creatures who lived beneath it, was always changing, always remembering. And so was he. Every day, Eli would sit by the entrance of his cave, watching the world unfold around him. The whisper of the wind through the trees, the rustling of leaves underfoot, the distant call of birds settling in for the night. He had learned that nothing in life needed to be chased. The stars, once so far away, were always within reach. Not to possess, but to understand, to share. He spent his mornings telling stories, not just of the stars, but of everything he had learned on his journey. The animals who passed through the forest would stop and listen, and in return, they shared their own tales, the memories of those they had loved, of the nights they had gazed up at the same stars, of the way light had always found its way to them when they needed it most. And every story shared, every memory told, seemed to brighten the world a little more. The stars above, though faint, began to shine more clearly in the night sky. Not because they had been held onto, but because they had been remembered. One evening, as Eli sat with a family of rabbits by the edge of the forest, looking up at the stars, he noticed something, a glimmer in the distance. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but it grew brighter, and then another appeared beside it, and then another. One by one, the stars began to return, not all at once, but slowly, as if the sky had been waiting for the right moment, for enough hearts to remember what had been lost. Eli felt his chest swell with quiet happiness. He had never thought that the stars would return in the way he had imagined, but here they were, filling the sky, soft and shimmering, just as they had once been. And in the glow of those stars, Eli knew that his journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the years that followed, Eli continued to share the story of the stars, not just with the creatures of the forest, but with any who would listen, young and old, from the farthest corners of the world. He became known as the storyteller, the bear who had once collected stars and now gave them away, not as things to possess, but as gifts to carry in the heart. And every story he told, every life he touched, brought more stars into the sky. The forest, once quiet and still, now buzzed with life, with creatures who had learned that light was not something to be hoarded, but something to be shared. And in this sharing, they found something even greater: connection. As Eli grew older, his fur silvered with time, and the small cave that had once been his home became a gathering place for those who wished to listen, to learn, and to remember. But even as his bones grew stiff, his heart remained light, for he knew that the stars were not bound to the sky. They were bound to the stories we tell, to the memories we hold, and to the hearts we touch. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky deepened into its familiar night of soft twinkling lights, Eli lay in front of his cave, looking up at the stars. They were brighter now, full of all the stories and memories, each one a beacon of shared light, a symbol of everything that had been given and received. And as the wind whispered softly through the trees, Eli smiled to himself, knowing that his journey had come full circle. He had once been the bear who searched for stars, but now he was the bear who had helped the world remember them. And in the remembering, they would never fade. They would only grow brighter, like the quiet flicker of hope that never truly goes out, but only waits to be seen again. Eli closed his eyes, and as he drifted into sleep, the stars watched over him, not as distant lights, but as old friends, the same ones who had been with him since the very beginning. And he knew that no matter where his dreams took him, no matter how far he traveled, he would always carry their light with him, in the stories he told, in the hearts he touched, and in the memories of all those who had shared the night sky with him. And so, the stars, soft and steady, glowing with the warmth of shared love, remained, lighting up the world for as long as there were hearts to remember them.